excited to have you, and we are excited to be part of the Law and Government session for the Leadership College. I would like to introduce our three panelists, and I hope you came prepared with questions as well, because this really is designed for you all to learn. So let me start with the Honorable Grace M. Hanlon, who was elected in 2021 as a judge for the New York Supreme Court 8th Judicial District. She graciously allowed us to have her swearing-in ceremony here on January 1st of 2022. It was a fabulous way to start off a new year. Prior to her election, she was a confidential law clerk to Chautauqua County Court Judge David Foley. She also has experience as a former assistant county district attorney and assistant public defender. She's also been a lawyer in private practice, so really has spanned almost the entire spectrum of legal work. Kristin Lee Yaw in the middle is a partner at Hall and Lee Yaw LLP here in Jamestown. Her firm handles matters of real estate law, landlord and tenant, estate matters, wills, and Social Security disability. And she currently serves as the president of the Jamestown Bar Association. And then Elliot Raimondo on the end serves as corporation counsel for the city of Jamestown, which means he is the primary attorney and legal advisor to the mayor of Jamestown. And that's actually a role that Robert H. Jackson held. He also represents the rights of the city in all actions brought by it or against it. And I am going to ask each of the panelists to start off with a brief story, really, as to how you got to where you currently are. And we'll go from there with your questions and thoughts. Okay. Judge, would you please start?
Thank you. Good morning. I don't know how far back. I'm a little old, so I don't know how far back I want to go. But let me just say this. The most important thing that got me here is my family and my family support. I grew up the youngest of 10 in Long Island. My father never graduated from high school. My mother graduated from high school. My grandmother lived with us, who went to first grade. She was illiterate. And they all stressed education. And they sent us all to Catholic school because they thought it was the best education we could get. And in order for all of us to go at the same time, we had to work bingo and at St. Vincent de Paul and clean the church and the rectory. So we also learned work ethic. My parents each worked 2 jobs as I was growing up, so we saw work ethic. And I also saw my family become a nurse, an infectious disease doctor, a lawyer, a math teacher, a horticulturist, an Air Force veteran. So they all succeeded in their own path, and that was a guide for me too. And when I decided to, I went to UB undergrad. A number of my sisters also went there because it was in-state tuition and it was cheap to go. And we had a place to stay when we came up. And then I went to law school, and I did my last semester of law school at the University College of London. And I worked for a barrister, which is essentially a litigator in England. And at the time, it was 1989. There were 5,000 barristers in the United Kingdom, and 500 of them were women. And I worked for a woman that was of Jamaican descent, and they all wear wigs when they go to court with a robe, and she would put her wig on top of her dreadlocks and go in and try cases. She was amazing. She was a very strong woman. And it was then watching her that I decided that I wanted to be a litigator too. But I was a litigator in all those different places that were mentioned, but in order to get elected Supreme Court judge, you have to run in the 8th Judicial District. And it came back to my family really supporting me and being there for me and going to all sorts of events and marching in parades and sending out pamphlets and going to events with me that actually got me here and elected. So briefly, that's my story.
Yeah. All right, Kristin.
That was brief because she's got a great story. I'm Kristin Lee Yaw, and I have a completely different story than Judge Hanlon. I lived here for part of my life, but not much of it. I had a difficult start, and I didn't finish high school. I have two sons. They're 26 and 24, and after having them, I realized I was going to need to feed them and buy diapers and all the things that come along with them, and figured if I was going to tell them education was important, I should probably pursue one. I was in the Carolinas at the time, and everybody can go to community college there, so I started there, and I found this amazing woman who was, she taught international studies, so I took a couple of courses from her. Brilliant lady. And she stopped me at one point and said, you're real smart and you need to not stop. Like, people are going to tell you to put your kids first, and you should, except make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well, because those kids are going to go and you've got a whole bunch of life left. And she was married to an attorney, and her father was a judge, and she said that was her, she was a professor. She was amazing. She had done amazing things in her life, but she just told me not to stop, which I was grateful for. I came back to New York and started working for the law firm that I now am a partner at. My law partner is actually the one, when I was like 22, I think, asked me what I was going to do. I was already going to community college, and I said, well, sounds a little silly, but I'd like to be a lawyer. And he was like, why is that silly? And I said, because I have a GED. And I maybe had taken a couple of classes by then, I'm not sure, but he helped me map a way through New York State and through public schools. So I moved back to Jamestown, went to work for him, got some more credits at JCC down the road here, because again, it was affordable. I was working a couple of jobs and raising my kids, and I went to Fredonia State to finish my undergrad, and then was fortunate enough to get into UB Law. I do want to say that the lady I met in Greenville, South Carolina, that told me not to quit, wrote me one of my letters of recommendation to law school, and I was told by the admissions committee how much weight that carried, that I kept in touch with that lady, and she still had that faith in me. I did 1 year of law school at UB. Again, it was affordable. It was like $13,000 or something like that compared to a ton other places. I completed the year eligible. This is why I knew the statutory requirement earlier. I finished the year eligible to return for my second year of law school. I didn't. I worked under my partner and petitioned the appellate division to sit the New York State Bar. I was admitted. I was one of 2 candidates that sat and passed the New York State Bar under that method that year. And so I got all the way through my education and through the bar. I think it cost me like $40,000 total with the New York State stuff. So I've been with the firm since 2003. I partnered in 2015, and my kids both have graduated college, and I was hoping I'd get them through high school. So that's where I am now.
Just as an aside, New York State is one of the few states where you can still read the law, which is what Kristin is describing. So you don't have to graduate from law school in order to take the bar. You do have to have apprenticeships and those practical hours about it, but just throw that out there. All right, Elliot?
Okay. I feel, underwhelmed. I'm underwhelming compared to these two, but I grew up here in Jamestown, New York. Pretty unremarkable. My mother is an educator. My father is a businessman of sorts, sometimes successful, sometimes not. He'll laugh if I ever say that. I graduated from Jamestown High School, and at that time, I was looking at different colleges. I looked at Canisius, which is maybe partly why I'm here, as well as a couple other colleges. I enjoyed the Canisius English department, and simply put, they offered me money, and I went. So, my big thing as far as being an attorney is I love telling stories, I love reading stories. When I was in grade school all the way through high school, I've always loved reading. I went to Canisius, English majors, not really sure what I was going to do with my life. I did a lot of different activities at Canisius. I see Mr. Williams here. His predecessor ran a poetry troupe that I enjoyed. I'm guessing he may still run it, I'm not sure. And After that, I did mock trial at Canisius, and I kind of graduated Canisius without a plan, loosely that I wanted to go to law school to continue, reading, writing, telling stories, and helping the groups that I found were underrepresented as far as telling their stories. I didn't go right away to law school. I worked as a custodian here in Jamestown for about a year. I took all the money that I made doing that. I went to Kenya and I traveled around East Africa and used it all up for a year while my loan companies were chasing me down. In the meantime, I applied to UB Law School. I was accepted to UB Law School, and I went to UB Law. It was an interesting story about how I got here as the Corporation Counsel of Jamestown. I went to UB Law School. I applied for a summer job in Virginia. That summer I got that job. I ended up not working out, and I ended up getting another job for a trial attorney in Wyoming. So I ended up going to Wyoming for a couple months and parlayed that into a job in Buffalo, whereby I worked there for the next 2 years, decided after the 2 years that I no longer wanted to do any criminal law or do anything like that, and I ended up working downstate New York for a union. While working for that union, I started doing political campaigns, albeit not very successfully. I worked for the current mayor as his treasurer when he ran for Congress. He did not win. Then I worked for an unsuccessful candidate, though she was comptroller of Buffalo, Vanessa Klashevsky, for a while, and her and her group of city council candidates didn't win, but third time's the charm. The mayor of Jamestown won, and he invited me to come back. We had been childhood friends, and here I am as the Corporation Counsel of Jamestown.
Okay, I'm going to, yes, sorry.
And like I'd say, at any point, if the students, if you have questions or comments, just, jump right in. You don't have to wait to be panel. It's just to hear about the different paths that people took to where they are. Because I know when I was an undergrad at Canisius, and I think, were you talking about Sababu Norris when you were talking about Benny's predecessor? I knew him when I was there too. And, I remember when I was an undergrad, I was thinking that there was going to be this kind of straight line from, where you start to where you finish. And my own experience was a lot different than that. And so I think it's great for them to hear all the different ways that you got to where you are now. When I worked for Senator Schumer, one of the people that I got to know very well was the Chautauqua County Executive, Mark Thomas, at the time. And I taught a government class at Canisius last year, and Mark came and was one of our speakers. And one of the things that I never knew, all the years that I knew him, is Mark Thomas was the Chautauqua County Executive, so that's an elected office here, obviously. But I didn't know that he went to undergrad as a forestry major. And what he ended up doing, I always thought, oh, county executive, that's sort of your, the pinnacle of your career. But he went on to be the regional director for New York State Parks in the region that includes Niagara Falls. And he literally got to oversee the sort of reconstruction and revitalization of the Niagara Falls State Park. And so, for him, being a forestry major in college and then getting to be in charge of, reconstructing Niagara Falls, one of the wonders of the world, it just shows the sort of crazy, unpredictable path that he took to get from there to there. So, Kristin, you were going to have another question. And any of you jump in anytime, please.
I'm really only asking questions to encourage all of you to ask questions. So does anybody have a question now? Let me start there before I jump in. Please.
Honestly, by the time I got to that phase, because when you take the bar and when you find out you passed the bar, there's a long time in between. So I took the bar exam in June?
July.
And then I didn't get results until November, right? So there's a whole mind trick thing that happens in between there. But between even trying to go to college after not finishing high school and having to go through the application process, and then again to get into Fredonia, and again to get into UB, which I was waitlisted for, and then again trying to get the actual allowance to take the bar exam, they could have told me anything at that point. I wasn't worried about if I passed, I was just gonna keep going until it was done. You know, you can take the bar exam as many times as you want. I'd already practiced in my head, like how I was gonna eat that in public, right? Because the whole bar association here knew what I was doing. I had been a part of it for a really long time. So, I mean, I thought it was great. I got an email in the middle of the night and read it over and over because there weren't exclamation points or bold-face typed at all. It just said, you passed the bar exam, and I just kept reading it. And it was, I mean, there are some moments in life you can't ever forget, and that certainly, I mean, everybody on the panel knows exactly where they were and who the first person they told they passed the bar exam to. Thank you.
When I started college, I was a physical therapy sports. I played softball at UB. By the way, Canisius beat us every time when I was going to UB. But then my first semester, I took chemistry with all the pre-med, pre-dent, engineering, whatever students. And I realized that science was not my thing. They went through in 3 days of chemistry in college what I knew from high school. And then I was essentially lost after that. I almost actually quit school at that point because I thought I wasn't made for it. But I ended up being a social sciences with a concentration in legal studies, and I didn't really declare that until my third year. And I was able to take a couple of classes from UB law professors that really convinced me I wanted to go to law school. I was working in New York City in a little cubicle, and I took it at the end of July. It was Halloween, and you know, I'm so old, it was by snail mail. And it went to my sister's house in Buffalo, and she called me to tell me that the letter came, but she was refusing to open it because she didn't want the pressure of having to tell me if I failed. So we had a big argument on the phone, and she finally opened it, and I had passed. So, yeah, everybody remembers where they were when they got the notice.
Well, and they used to publish the answers in the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So that, like,
Yeah.
my law partner, like, they had to wait for the newspaper, and then they found out with everybody.
Yeah.
It's an interesting experience. Unless you, like, there's only the people that have gone through it that can, from studying for that test to finding out the results, like, it's an interesting way. I didn't know that I was only one of two that did it that way until, like, sometime later I found out that there was an analysis of applicants and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's super wild.
Yeah.
Small number, because there was a lot of people that took the test. There's a lot of people that take the New York bar every year.
I have a Virginia bar story because that's where I took the bar. I was also a lawyer before I did this, and in Virginia they give you a 5 or 6 digit number, and then you have to log in starting, like, I think it's like the last week of October, because they don't really tell you when the results are going to be published, so you're logging in every day to see if your number comes up. And then I got there and I looked at it, and my numbers had passed, and I was like, oh God, what if I remembered the number wrong? so I checked every iteration of those like 6 digits, and I walked into the kitchen with my parents and I said, I think I passed the bar. My mom said, what do you mean you think? I said, well, 85% of the number combinations passed. I said, so if in case I didn't remember it wrong, I think I still passed. And then I got an official letter about 10 days later, so that confirmed it. Elliot, your story?
Hi. So my story was, I took the bar exam. I worked while taking the bar exam for an immigration law firm. Throughout that time period, I just worked the mornings and go and study. And I suppose I barely remember it because after I'd taken the bar exam, I wanted to do labor law. And I got a job offer for a union. And they said, well, you're going to come work for us as a law clerk. And I thought that it would be similar to the immigration firm. Oh, I work the mornings, I'm just a law clerk. This is how you're going to use me. And I remember I packed all my worldly possessions in a car, drove to Troy, New York, got myself an apartment in Troy. And I worked 12-hour days for this union, working as a labor relations specialist, as a quasi-attorney. I couldn't try cases, but they had me doing everything under the sun. So I don't know if you've ever worked continuously. I kind of just forgot the bar exam was happening because there was always something to happen. So when it happened, I looked at my results. I was like, yes, I passed. Went to go tell my boss, and my boss was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to pay you more. To which we both gave a chuckle, and we have him and I have a very interesting relationship even today. But it was kind of almost a dream state for me.
Did he pay you more?
Gave me a $2,000 raise. That was,
There it is.
he threatened to fire me if I did not pass it. He was, the Christmas story, I always look at him, he was probably the best attorney I've ever worked for, but he was a lot like Scrooge. And
Sounds about right.
yeah, he was fine sending me here, there, everywhere, but, I also had friends who had been working for large law firms. They didn't pass the bar exam, and they were terminated right away. So it was, I don't know, there's some years to separate us, but it was kind of the fear of it, where I knew if I didn't pass the bar exam, how am I going to eat? Because I've got all this debt. Thankfully, I didn't have any debt from Canisius, but I had all this debt from law school that I knew that, UB would come for me eventually. And it was surreal.
Any questions from the students?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Question for Judge Elliot. So I know you said after you graduated from Canisius, you didn't have a plan. Did you feel overwhelmed?
Did I what?
Did you feel overwhelmed, I think you said?
Yeah, I did. You move back into your parents' house. You don't have really a plan. You go to college and you go and, to whoever comes in with a great plan, I'm super proud of you that you have this plan that you can execute. I didn't have that plan, so now I'm just working. I get myself a job, and mom was like, "Well, what are you going to do now?" So I have a very strong, domineering mother in my life. So she's like, "Well, why are you here? What are you? You need to leave." So yeah, it was stressful because I didn't know. You don't know what you're going to do. You have this loose idea that you're going to go to law school, but when I graduated Canisius, I knew I wasn't ready. I didn't know where I wanted to go to law school. I didn't know, what was really next. It wasn't clear in my head, and I thought I needed that extra year, but obviously, it's kind of ridiculous. You've already graduated college. You just can't spend another year in college. So I just worked and, put up with, I love my parents, but I can't live with them. And I worked and, paid them rent and was just there. So when I told them that, my grandfather many years ago, he got a job working in Nairobi, Kenya. So when I said I was going to go live with him and travel that country, they were kind of shocked. But off I went.
Mylon, did you have a question?
Well,
So you want that one?
law school, your first year, at least my first year, it was mandated what classes you took. And they were, the basic crim pro, criminal law, contracts, civ pro, real property, constitutional law, torts. Yeah, it gives you the bedrock of the law. And then after that, my second year, there were some still required courses I had to take, but then you could start to take courses that interested you. And I took more criminal law, constitutional law, trial practice, because I thought I wanted to be a litigator. But where I went is the Socratic method, which is basically, you come to class, and I went to Pace Law School down in White Plains, and I was living with my parents in New Jersey, kind of similar to Elliot. And I didn't realize getting over the Tappan Zee Bridge was going to be so hard. And I was late every day for my criminal law class. And I would walk in with a bagel and a cup of coffee and just sit wherever I wanted, not knowing there was a seating chart with everybody's picture on it. And the professor realized I wasn't on his seating chart. And Socratic basically means he calls out your name and says, okay, tell me about the case of blah, blah, blah. And you have to give the facts and the holding, and then he'll ask you questions, and then maybe you get to sit down. But it makes you think on your feet. It makes you be prepared to know the whole case. And there's a lot of reading in law school. I mean, you read more than one case, and they're not 2 pages long. You know, there's a major, there's a concurrence, there's a dissent. You have to know them all. But it teaches you to look at both sides of the coin, because if you say it's A, the professor will say, well, what about B? What about C? What about D? So it makes you think like a lawyer. It makes you, you know, when a client comes in to see you, you can't just accept everything they say. You have to be able to ask them questions to know, you know, what the whole thing is, and it teaches you that.
I think that I'm saying, so like law school kind of like teaches you about the law, gets you in the mindset of being a lawyer, but the bar exams would actually makes you a practicing lawyer.
Correct.
Yeah, and the way that the bar exam is situated, law school is really different than any other schooling that I participated in that it's backwards, right? So you go to class and you go through what she just described. At the end of class, he goes, you've got X, Y, Z, have them prepared for next class, right? You don't talk about it first. You don't have any introduction to your subject matter. You read it. You analyze it. You're ready to talk about it. It's on you, right? And then you come in and your name's called. God forbid your name's called, because you don't have any idea whose name's being called, right? Everybody's got to be equally prepared. I used to have a law professor that would send us all out for coffee if the person he called wasn't prepared. Talk about pressure. Now you've got, and nobody's happy about that, right? Like, everybody's there for a purpose. So it's backwards in that way. So they're teaching you subject matter the thing that I personally love about law is that it keeps building on itself, you know? Like, so start with the Magna Carta, which is well before the US law, but it's relevant to what we're learning in law school, and then it keeps stacking on itself like that. When you get to the bar exam, it's not the same way per se, but now you have no idea what topics are coming at you. They give you fact patterns. If it's multiple choice, it's best answers. Like there's 3 right answers, 4 right answers. You got to get with the best answer or what the issue is. A lot of writing, you know, she's a judge. There's a reason that there's judges, and Elliot and I can go against each other, and we both adamantly believe in our interpretation of the law and how the facts are presented, so on and so forth. She's the one that comes down with the ruling, right? So being a good attorney doesn't necessarily mean you're going to come up with the same answer as her, because my client's right, and Elliot's going to say his client's right. You know what I mean? So the issue spotting and seeing where the problems are, my biggest thing when I sit down with clients, because people come in and they want to tell you a big narrative, or a great big story, but for us, we need very specific things in order to apply it to the law, right? And how the law applies to that scenario. So I always when I start with clients, I start with, what outcome are you looking for, right? Like, your best case scenario at the end of this is what? Because now I know what I'm listening for through the process, which is exactly what the bar exam is. They're like, here's all this information, what's going on, right? And you're like, okay, let me figure it out and write it back to you. And if I found the problems, then I got the question right. I may not have interpreted everything and laid it out all right, but if I spotted all the things that need to be identified, that's the bar exam. Whereas school, they want you to know all the way around it.
There's rarely a right answer in the law. I mean, I don't really mean that specifically, but it's more everything is open to interpretation. And then hopefully you get the judge to agree with your interpretation of the law. But the bar exam especially is more to what Kristin said. Did you give a rational reason for why you think this should be interpreted the way you interpreted it? And so, for the bar, and I guess more for the bar exam, there's not really a right answer for that. It's, did you show us how you think and why you got to the conclusion you got to?
And one of the things more specifically that law school taught me, and they can all agree or disagree, but I read, like we all read a lot every day still, right? Like I thought law school was bad, but practice is just law school exams every day, back to back to back. But what it taught me how to do is read. really read. Like, each word has different meanings and interpretations, and when you're writing legally, you have to figure out which exact word you want to use in that specific place, because how can it be pulled apart, right? So my kids will be like, you were just reading for 8 hours and you didn't stop. I'm like, yeah, but I'm reading right now like you watch TV, right? Like, you just sit there and stare at it and it's going. But when I'm reading for work, like, my body language is different. I've got 3 different colored pens. I've got tabby things, you know what I mean? Like, reading in that first year where every single word is relevant because it could turn something that you're reading, a rule that you're reading. Is it and or? Man, does that make a difference.
Shall or may.
These are big things.
comma in the
that
right place.
law school and the volume of reading and then being quizzed on it like that taught me how to really read. Like, I can read something and forget what I just read. Or I could read something and now discuss it with you at length and have a million different questions because we just decided that that's how we're going through it. Contracts.
If
right?
you- if
Like,
you
that's
wanna-
how contract law.
Feel for what the first year of law school is like. There's an old movie called The Paper Chase.
It'll just frighten you.
Just, yeah, you can check that out.
Frighten me.
But yeah, like they're saying, you know, one of the law school kind of changes the way you think. But one of the benefits of that is that when you graduate from law school and become a lawyer, you can, you know, you can work in any number of areas. Once you know how to, they call it think like a lawyer. When I started out and I was in private practice, I represented a Chinese lumber company that sold lumber to a furniture maker and had a contract dispute. I worked on a case involving chemical plant workers who had worked with a chemical called orthotoluidine, who developed bladder cancer over years and were suing their employer 50 years later. Then I became a prosecutor, and I started out in the domestic violence misdemeanor section. And you were talking about like an exam every day. Part of what we had to do when we weren't in court, we would do intake, and you'd show up in the courthouse at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there'd be a line of about 50 police officers outside the intake office. Each one of them was bringing you a case, and you had to, you know, and you had to move the line along. And so in the space of about 10 minutes, you had to read the police report, call the victim, get their side of the story, and then decide, are we bringing charges? What charges are we bringing? And do we want to hold the person pending their next court hearing? And you just had this line of cranky police officers that you had, and then you had to, you know, get information out of them to try to make those decisions. So it's, but that's one of the things I like about it, is that you can be a corporate lawyer, and then you can go on and do criminal law or some other kind of law. Any other questions from the students? Go over there.
I have a question for all of you, actually. Like, what were your toughest challenges when you were in law school, and what advice would you give to yourselves back then with the knowledge you gain now?
When I went to law school, your first year, you weren't allowed to work. You had to just concentrate on law school. And that was a really good thing. It's a hard thing financially, but it was a good thing for, I think I would be easier on myself. It's a very competitive environment, so it's easy to be tough on yourself. I think that I would have had a much smaller study group because you get together and you learn to outline cases that prepares you for the next day. I ended up in my second year only having 3 people, and then by happenstance, 2 of them graduated 1 and 2. So it was a good study group to have. I didn't graduate 1 or 2. So I think those 2 things are, you know, you're going to work hard enough, you're going to have to work really hard, but you also have to take care of yourself and your mental health and do things that give you joy and distraction and not be so hard on myself, I think.
I think the toughest thing for me is always, and still is, rings through today, is myself. So in law school, you're working incredibly hard, and you're buried into a book, but you also have to think about, what am I doing in the future? What opportunities am I going to have? What should I try for? And I think a lot of law school students, you know, myself included, though at times I, you know, surprise myself, say, well, maybe I can only do this or I can only do that, instead of shooting for the stars and then being surprised when you get it. I think about this young man's question still, and I think the only difference that I had was, when I was working, I could have stayed working in that job forever. I'd still be there today. I did a good job at it. They wouldn't have fired me, and I would have done that. But something got into me where I was like, well, I'm going to apply for that job, or I'm going to read that book, or I'm going to apply this effort, and this effort is going to translate into this result. And the tough thing that I think for a lot of law students, at least for me, and I'm a first-generation law student, first generation on my dad's side of college, probably for you as well, is I didn't have a lot of people where they had gone forward to big positions in life. So it was a question of saying, well, I'm going to apply myself this hard, and then I'm going to apply for this job, or I'm going to go for this position. Kristin?
I don't really know. Like, my head was so down because I was going to law school and I had the boys as well. Ultimately, just knowing everybody's gonna make it. Like, it's super, super high pressure. I wasn't trying to be at the top of my class. All I needed to do was finish, and I knew that that's all I needed to do. But it is still really high pressure, and I mean, you watch people fall. The class you start with isn't the class you finish with. The people you sit down to take the bar exam with, you watch them drop like flies in 2 days. It's one of the weirdest things I've ever witnessed. But recognizing that everybody else's story isn't yours, right? Everybody's not coming to the table with the same opportunities, with the same preparation. I think one of the biggest things for me is that I always felt like there were gaps in my education because I didn't know a lot of the historic context of things that other people that had finished primary education had, but everybody's coming with some lack. My life experience ended up being way more valuable than some of the stuff that I thought I was missing. So whatever you think you're missing, I guess that's what I come away from it with. Whatever you think your downfall is, whatever you think your handicap is, may very well be your strength. So just know everybody's fighting and keep going.
And lots of people come in, especially for me, going to a school close to the city, a lot of my classmates wanted to go and work for a big firm on Wall Street. And they all wanted to get on law review, and they all wanted to be in the top 10%. And I quickly realized that big firm is not for me. So, once I stopped listening to the noise and just concentrating on getting through, and I wanted to get a job when I graduated, it got not easier, but it got more streamlined. I was more concentrated on really, just like Kristin said, getting through and getting a job. But I thought law school was a lot of fun, too.
I did, too.
I loved law school, so don't get me wrong.
It was super hard, but it was great.
It was awesome.
No, I think the young lady too, yeah.
What advice would you give on work ethic that helped you get through that you would use?
I think for myself, watching my parents, watching my older brothers and sisters was key. But also, I played initially 2 sports in college, field hockey and softball, and then I went down to 1. And without me knowing it, it taught me time management. Because in order to stay on the team, I had to have a certain grade point average. And I also was trying to get into law school. So I think time management, and we still use it today, that when you sit down, you have to be in a space and have a goal and an accomplishment to get this done. Because if you half read it or don't complete it or scan it, you're not going to be prepared. And that professor, it's going to be your day, and he's going to call on you, and you're going to stand up and not know what you're talking about. And let me tell you, you can't make it up in law school. And it's the same when, you're before, you're litigating a case or you're with a client, you have to know it. So I think time management and concentration are the 2 biggest things for me.
Almost everything I was scared to do, wasn't nearly as hard as I had made it in my mind. It's like, I think that has been, even in my career, is like the block for me is it's like, oh my gosh, that case is 45 pages. How am I going to read that and understand? Like, get out of that space because it's not doing you any good, right? Like, it's hard. It's going to be hard. But, I mean, you guys are finding that in college too, right? Like, you just sit down and do it. Stop thinking about how much you have to do or how hard it's going to be and get started. That was definitely time management. And that's part of it, right? I don't know if you've ever lost like a really important time losing your mind, but there's not a lot of time for that. So that would be mine. Just get started.
If I can add on to that, I agree completely with both of you said as far as time management and concentration. I think one of the things that helped me in that is, this is going to sound pretty cruel, but cutting people that couldn't do that. So I had my study group, and we all kind of lived the same style of life as far as, oh, it's not odd to be prepping for a class for 8 hours straight or writing a brief or, you know, doing whatever we needed to do to get the job done. And we may be spending 8 hours on this or 12 hours or just day after day after day you're working on that. And I remember some of my friends from Canisius that had already transitioned to their jobs or they were still hanging out in the college lifestyle. I couldn't see them anymore. I couldn't talk to them anymore because we were just living two separate lives, and it helped me greatly that the life that I was living wasn't populated by a group that wasn't doing this work anymore. I think Steve Harvey has the best example where he tried to bring his cousin to the company picnic, and his cousin got into a fight with the manager, and he realized while he loved his cousin, he couldn't bring his cousin there anymore. So.
Well, we're like the Friday night studiers, you know, it's what we do.
Yeah, I took boxes of books or even when I was practicing documents home for every holiday, and I would just have to spend some time by myself.
I still go into work on the weekends because I find that nobody else is there. It's quiet. You know, the 4 hours that I work on a Sunday is like 2 days because you get interrupted. You know, there's fires to put out, there's calls, there's questions. So those 4 hours I do, or 4 hours each day, and I can't work at home. I have dogs, you know, there's a TV. So, I go to work, and it really makes you get the job done.
We sound exciting, huh?
And I was thinking, I'm like, how many of you are thinking about law school? How many of you were thinking about law school before this panel and have now decided, good Lord, no? Okay. All right. What other questions do you have? Yes.
Question for any of the panelists. Considering the importance of your job, is there anything that you do or that you're required to do to sharpen your skills or keep them sharp?
Professionally, we're all required to have so much continuing legal education every year in order to renew our licenses. Well, every 2 years to renew our licenses. But we are required to be a little bit informed about all kinds of things all the time. You know, like he was explaining, you know, going from prosecuting and working for, you know, under contract law with Chinese people. Like there's all these different things, but like I'm in private practice and people can bring things to me on any given day that I've never thought of, you know, and I have to. There's a lot of additional research and connection because the biggest asset that I think I have as an attorney is my colleagues. Because if I haven't come across it, somebody may have, or they're like, oh, you know who I heard deal with something like that out and so call them, you know. So making sure that we keep good in civil relationships and continuing to have a curious mind is necessary outside of the requirements through the bar.
Do judges have special training as well?
Surprisingly enough, and I didn't know this, but we have to register every 2 years, and we have to put on the form that we've completed 24 hours of CLE. As a judge, you're actually deemed retired, so you don't have to take CLE.
Don't you guys have judges school though?
Yeah, but they don't make you go. I mean, I went, but they don't make you go. It's the silliest thing going. But I think that what Kristin says is really important, is that even now today, because I'm a brand new judge, and issues come up that are complex or unique or close calls, or that I've called other judges or other law clerks that I know have been working for a really long time. And my mindset at this point, and in private practice or when I was an ADA trying cases, was I'm going to do the best I can, work as hard as I can, do as much research, and then you have to make a decision. And you can't get bogged down and not make a decision. At some point, you have to make a decision. And in my job, I write a decision. You know, if they're before me, one's going to win and one's going to lose. It's just the nature of the game, of the law. But you know, they can appeal my decision, and then there's a panel of 5 judges in Rochester, the appellate division, that can say, no, Grace, you're wrong because this. So it's a constant thing. So I'm constantly reading the new appellate division cases, because I don't want to write a decision that they've, you know, suddenly changed the law on. So it is constant curiosity. It is constant vigilance. You're learning something new every day, and that's what I love about being a lawyer. No day is ever the same, ever. You have a plan when you go in to do A, B, and C. It never works. Never works. And I love that.
Sometimes I can't stand it.
Yeah. Sometimes it's exhausting, but still fun.
Oh, yes, Mel?
Actually, I don't know if they're in this. But I guess you guys talk about a lot of like your study groups that you know in law school. Can you like talk about like how important those connections are? With all the undergraduates kind of learning about the idea of networking, or like how impactful were your study groups when you were in law school?
They were everything. Yeah, they were everything. I personally had 3 members in my study group. We were extraordinarily different people. One was a union electrician before he went to law school. One was like a kid that he already had his MBA. He was like a professional student. And then a 21-year-old and me who had kids at home. They were so severely dedicated to what we were doing, and as was I, and the way that we were able to count on each other, not just from a work aspect, but also there aren't a lot of people that understand what you're going through while you're there. And so, you know, there'd be times where I'm like, I can't do it. I'm done, it's over. And, you know, Mike be like, well, I need you to take notes tomorrow, so that's untimely. You're gonna have to quit another time, you know, but it was like, just kind of keeping each other going and checked in. I am still in contact with all 3 of my study group partners. All 3 of them are practicing attorneys as well, which is, I don't know if you know this, but that's like not everybody that finishes law school goes on to practice law. So the fact that all 4 of us are practitioners is kind of significant as well.
We started out with 12 in my study group, which was a mistake. And after the first semester, 3 of them didn't return for the second semester. And you know, looking at it now, those 3 were the ones that were either always late, always unprepared, or just didn't show up. And I ended up with 2 other people. One guy was, he had been in the military, he was an intelligence officer, he was fluent in Russian. And the other guy was a dentist who I thought was really old. Now I'm, you know, older than he was then. He was 40.
Me and my group.
Yeah, he was 40. But we all brought they were both older than me, but we all brought different views of the cases, but we all had the same dedication and work ethic. I'm still in touch with, the one guy passed away, but the dentist passed away, but the other fellow who graduated, number 1, got a job with a big Wall Street firm. And he retired at 52. He worked in Moscow for a while. He worked in one of the law firms that initially opened up in Moscow. But yeah, he's retired now.
I agree completely. You know, our study group, we're still all in contact. And even from my Canisius days, I'm still in contact with a lot of people, which, you know, that's part of me. When you talk about preparing for different things, you know, in addition to the reading and always being curious, I spend a lot of time cultivating my network of individuals. So I'm sending out Christmas cards. I ran a marathon in Wyoming earlier this year. I had a group of guys that showed up. None of them live in New York State anymore. We all met at Canisius or UB, but everyone, it's an interesting way people spread out. You know, and it's one of those things. I was in New York City maybe 2 months ago. I walked into one of my friend's offices that worked at the law firm. He was miserable, completely miserable. But, you know, I made him take me out to dinner. His wife refused to come since she said the two of us spent too much time drinking and carrying on. But, you know, we're through with each other through all of that, and I've maintained those groups, and I miss those people.
I think it's even more important once I started working as a lawyer. And none of us, well, Kristin has stayed in the same, but, you know, that's unique. Elliot and I have had different jobs during our careers. And obviously, when you leave a job, people might not be happy you're leaving, but I've never burned bridges. I've always maintained relationships with attorneys and bosses that I've had in the past. And I think that's very important, that, you know, you maintain those relationships with prior colleagues and prior bosses.
Judge, you mentioned that, you know, some people in your study group didn't show up, showed up late. Can you maybe talk about the importance of, I don't know, going to class, attending all your classes, I don't know, maybe doing all your work, you know, being prepared, and how that is a necessity, not just in your undergraduate years, but it definitely prepares you well for graduate school, law school.
There is a direct correlation between, and it still, for me today, there's a direct correlation between showing up, being on time, being prepared, doing the work, and success. Absolutely, without question. And I went to UB with people that partied that, you know, the first 2 weeks were drop ads, so they didn't really go to any classes. They'd show up and grab a syllabus and then, you know, ghost it. And they didn't do very well. You know, even today, people are surprised when they appear before me that, and I'm surprised that they're surprised, that I can ask questions because I've read all the papers and I know the facts of the case and I've read the law. And they're surprised by that. But I don't know how I'm going to be able to write a decision and make a decision if I don't get all the information out of them that's important. So you learn that culture in college. And if you look around, those people that are not showing up, not doing the work, not preparing, are either not going to graduate or they're not going to be prepared for the job, because people don't pay you to be late and not work.
Can I tack on to that?
Sure.
So in my introduction, I told you that my life, I had kind of an interesting front end of the story. And what I learned was that preparedness reduced my stress level. I had been raised in anxiety and like survival. You know, it was very, very stressful all the time. And being prepared brought that stress level still to this day. If I feel like my desk is in order and I've hit where I need to hit, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go home and relax. I enjoy my life outside of the office. But on top of that, what I also learned was that the more prepared I was, and the more often I appeared in front of the same judges, the less they thought I wasn't prepared. The more they believed what I said, the more they believed my interpretation of the facts, the presentation of what was happening. And I've had judges say, thank you for coming in with your case ready to go on this matter. I'm like, oh, it's a little strange to me that other people wouldn't, but you're welcome, Judge. So what I found, and I found it in other areas of work as well, because before I was an attorney, I did some other things, but I found that the better my work product was presented consistently, the less it was questioned. Like my outcomes I was getting better outcomes just because it was put together the same way over and over and over. So even I have an area of practice that's very paper dominant, and I luckily only get to the judges when there's lacking evidence, basically. But I found that the more I took care of the front end and prepared the front end, I was literally making more money with less work, right? Like, because I was winning them out of the gate instead of, okay, well, let's try again, file an appeal, ask for a reconsideration. I'm spending all this time instead of being like, I'm going to sit down, get everything I need, put it together properly, and submit it. And after doing that repeatedly, being properly prepared and submitting things repeatedly to the same people, the scrutiny was less and everything about my life was more efficient. So now my stress level's lower, my outcome's higher, and I'm actually doing less to get there. So.
Follow up a little bit?
Yep.
I mean, that's wonderful. When you're thinking about, like, what does it mean to be prepared, though, right? Because you can kind of have, like, well, I've done what was asked of me, but what you're saying is sort of like, I just got to think about all the different facets of what could possibly happen, and that's part of your preparation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right? Rather than, like, that, well, there's just a very limited amount. So it's almost, your preparation is thinking about how every different thing could happen that you're not accounting for.
Well, and Judge had talked about, in college, people coming in and grabbing a syllabus. Well, in law school, you end up making your own. It's called outlining, right? And as you cover a subject matter, you create, here's my topic, and then you have case law that goes underneath it. So when you prepare a case to present, like for me, when I go to argue in front of a judge, I will write a memorandum because I'm going to tell them what I'm about to say, right? That way they can take what I'm about to say, look at the record that they have in front of them because they're going to be prepared too. And the more that that they're seeing it, the more I care about the outcome. First of all, I don't think you can be prepared for anything that you don't care about the outcome of, right? So if you're not preparing for something, then you're already saying you don't care about the outcome. And I guess that's what you have to ask yourself. If you're not going to prepare for a class, you don't care for the outcome of the class, what's the point of being there?
I was involved in there was a fellow that came up from Virginia to Clymer, New York, which is a dry town still, very conservative, and killed the superintendent of schools in Clymer, and then drove back to Virginia. And I was an ADA at the time, and the evidence was here in Clymer, it was in Erie, Pennsylvania, it was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, because he took the victim's phone with him, and we were able, through the FBI, to ping both of their phones from Clymer through Erie, down 79, all the way to Harrisburg, where he threw the victim's phone over a bridge, and it happened to land on an island where they were installing a bathroom, and somebody found it. So when we called it, they answered. And it went all the way to Virginia, where he was from. And there were emails. We had to get a guy from California, the Google guy, I called him, to put in the foundation for the emails because it was Gmail. We had a gun with blood. We had DNA. We had bank records because when he killed the guy, he dumped him in the bushes of his house. And he put him on the back of his car and dumped him in the bushes of his house. And he left a receipt behind of he had withdrawn money in Erie on his way down. So we had the picture, we had the bank records that showed it was him. It was date and time stamped. We had videos from the Clymer High School where he visited looking for this superintendent to kill him during school. There ended up being 65 witnesses and 300 pieces of evidence. And let me tell you, the worst thing you could do as a litigator is stand before a jury of 12 people and another defense attorney who's more prepared than you, and he makes a fool out of you because you don't know all of it. And not only don't you know all of it, but you've interviewed the witness, and then you've thought about that and gone outside of what they said and gone back and interviewed them again. Because after you've interviewed the 5 other people or looked at 50 pieces of evidence, you realize you have to go back. It's constant. But that's how you get a conviction if that's what you're looking for. That's how you get success. You can't, last minute procrastinate and pick it up a week ahead of time or 2 days ahead of time and it was months and months and months and weekends. But we got a conviction.
And so if I could summarize, in order to get your conviction, or to get the result you want, you maybe had to read all the communications, read them in depth, maybe read them multiple times, respond in a timely manner, read all the details to get all of the information.
Correct.
I'd actually say there's no maybe about that.
No maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a caveat to that, respectfully, Judge.
Sure.
So you have to make the decision on what you're going to prepare for. And I know when the judge was in ADA preparing for this case, she had this case this week and she had to prepare, 300, 400 hours. And, one of the things I struggle with in my line of work is you have to choose what you're going to prepare for. Because if you look at your life, you're always going to have more duties than what you have time to do. So I think, in my own work, I usually have, I'd say, a bunch of cases. But at the end of the day, I need to keep the mayor and the city council happy. Otherwise, that's going to cause me to have a lot of issues. Just like where if you're in school, you have to prepare for your classes, but you may also need to work. You also may need to take care of a sibling or take care of an elderly relative. And you have to make that decision of what am I going to cut out of my life to do this versus what am I going to prepare for and what is it's going to be important. I hear the judge's story and I know, she had to prepare for that case, but she probably wasn't in the town of Mina doing, traffic tickets the day before.
Actually, I was in the town of Dunkirk. I was. And it is about, always, like Elliot says, you have to prioritize. I still had other cases that I had to handle, and it goes back to Scott with the 50 cops in line. You have to decide which cases really need your attention and which need your judgment. Still work, but there's different levels for work for different cases. Obviously, a high-profile homicide case takes priority over traffic tickets, but I still had to do it.
We're prepared.
And we're prepared, yeah.
Say, Scott, I think we have gone over slightly our time.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
no.
yeah, no, I wanted to add one couple quick things, and you judge who are the judge, and then you who appear before the judge can chime in too. I mean, a couple things from appearing in court that I've learned regarding preparedness is you want to make it easy for the judge to rule your way. The judge, you're the expert of your case. The judge has 1,000 cases in front of her. And so you need to come in prepared and show the judge why she should rule for you. The one thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think judges hate it when lawyers come in and just kind of say, here you go, judge, what should we do? And you're probably not going to like the response because not only have you not really given the judge anything to work with, but she's annoyed with you now. And that goes into the next point, which is that if you're practicing somewhere, you're probably appearing before the same judges over and over and over again. And you may do that for years and years and years. And so having a reputation for being prepared and on time and trustworthy and honest is important. Because what that means, I think, and tell me if I'm right, you're going to have a bad day. You're going to have a lot of bad days. And if you have a reputation as somebody who's solid and you have a bad day, the judge is going to give you some breathing room. But if you're somebody who's always showing up late and never prepared and can't answer the judge's questions, you're going to have a lot harder time, and you're not going to get that benefit of the doubt when you walk into the courtroom. Do you want to say anything about some of those things?
You know, my big brother, who was a lawyer, he was 20 years older than me, gave me the best advice when I was striking out to take my first job was, you control your reputation. And what Scott says is exactly right. If you have a reputation for being prepared, being honest, being candid, it goes a long way, always. And you control that.
And I think this is important. I think this applies to lawyers and it applies to students too. And this is something that's come up recently. If you mess up, fess up. Just, apologize. And because I have seen lawyers get their axles, wrapped around their axles just because they're so afraid to say that they're wrong when they know they're wrong, that they some of them end up getting themselves, reported to the bar and having their licenses threatened, all because they didn't want to say, I messed up. And so, I advised a lawyer the other day, he was telling me all about why the judge didn't get it and didn't get it right, and what was she saying, and I said, first thing you do when you walk in, apologize. Then start to talk about why you were trying to do the right thing when you messed up. And, it's amazing. I've seen people ruin their careers just because they couldn't admit that they had done something wrong or made a mistake. Any of the panelists want to comment on that?
Perfect.
No, I think that's very accurate. I've seen it too in my career, where and we're all going to make mistakes. None of us are perfect. But it shouldn't be for the lack of hard work. It should be a mistake. But you can really steamroll a simple mistake and make it much worse by trying to cover it up instead of just taking your medicine and admitting to it. And going on from there, because we've all made them.
And yeah, one last piece before I stop talking, I'll say know when to stop talking. I've also seen if the judge is going your way, stop talking. I've seen people come in, they have these great arguments. They're like, I gotta give this great argument because I came in with this great argument, and this judge she's got to hear my great argument. And so you walk in, you say a few sentences. Judge is like, good, all right, hey, I'm with you. You keep talking, pretty soon, she's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm not so sure about you. So judges are people, lawyers are people, kind of read the room, pay attention to how the judge is responding to you, both in what she's saying and the facial expressions maybe that she's making or what signals she's sending. And sometimes if the judge is going your way, say, thank you, Your Honor, the government rests. So we're just a little over time, so you want to do some closing remarks?
I do. So Jackson has a quote that I should be able to quote verbatim at this point, but I cannot. But the gist of it is, every lawyer prepares 3 arguments. The first is the utterly devastating written version, perfect, every comma in place. The second is the very inarticulate one they give before the judge in the courtroom full of mistakes and errors. And the third one is the brilliant retort they think of that night after they try to go to sleep. And so that's something I always try to keep in mind for anything that I do. There were no mistakes here today. You were all in the first category of brilliance. But would you please join me in thanking our panelists? And then Scott, I think it's up to you as to what comes next.
Well, again, I'd just like to say thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. And I know I benefited. I know the students benefited, and I hope that you did too. Is there anything the 3 of you just would like to say in closing?
I'd just like to say good luck. We were all in college at one point, and everybody has bad days. Everybody gets a bad test result or a bad paper grade or whatever. Don't let it define you. Keep working hard, work harder. and you'll succeed. So good luck.
Anything you can dream, you can do. Any reason that anybody's told you you can't, they're wrong. So just make your decisions and prepare to succeed.
I'll just thank you guys for your time, for waking up and coming down and taking this, doing experiences like this for your career.
Thanks again.
Thank you.